Thursday nighter, BC and Calgary feels like it was forever ago. But again, BC ends up saying Nathan Rourke, Nathan Rourke, Nathan Rourke. Game time decision. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how Mike's elbow feels. And then Rourke ends up standing on the sideline the whole game as Michael Riley came out and played that game. And he looked so much better, man. His arm was so fresh and he was throwing darts all over the place. And his offensive line was actually giving him some time. And I was just thinking, this, I think, is what we were supposed to see at the beginning of the BC Lions Riley experiment in 2019. Obviously, it didn't go that way, but let's do these games chronologically like always, and then we'll finish off, I'm sure, with a nice little flourish of all things Hamilton Tiger Cats for you. But BC Calgary, to me, Calgary is just, they can't get out of their own way at this point. They seem like they are such a backwards team at this point in terms of production. The way they are trying to run some of their stuff just doesn't look like it has in the past. I'm confused by them, really. And it's the first time I think I saw from Steve Daniel of the CFL since 1966, if I'm not mistaken, that both the Alberta teams have started 0-2, which tells you how weird this is. We all at CFL.ca picked Calgary to win that game.
Yeah.
And it wasn't because we thought that Calgary was overwhelming or they were going to, we just statistically, they've never done this in the last decade plus, start 0-2 and start 0-2 at home. So we just all took them because we're like, well, they have to bounce back, don't they? Without actually having any foresight or looking into the future of knowing what was going to come. It was just, I expect them to bounce back. And man, they did not.
Yeah, so a couple of things on this game. One, I don't think the BC Lions can pull the cover over our eyes anymore with this Mike Riley. Will he start? Will he not start? Nonsense. And will he play? Ends up, playing every snap and obviously ripping the Stampeders apart. So that was fun for the first 2 weeks. Let's stop doing that. Michael Riley is.
But are they breaking any rules? Because this is what everyone is kind of talking about. And again,
no, it's okay because he's playing every snap. He has to play every snap now. So so like you're not fooling anybody anymore. So I'm glad we're past that.
What if his elbow for some reason flares up and he sits out the entire week of practice and he's still listed as a game time decision, and then 1 week he doesn't?
I don't believe them. If he's on the roster, he's playing.
Yeah, I think that's the way that you have to prepare if you're another team. But I also don't think that there's a huge amount of difference in the way that you prepare. Not to say that Nathan Rourke is of the quality and the level right now in his career of Michael Riley or his understanding, because we saw Riley, even with a broken arm essentially in week 1, can still pick you apart and throw ducks and still complete them if his receivers are going crazy. So yeah, I feel like, though, like, really, what's the difference? It's not like you're preparing for Jordan Lynch and Michael Riley, like back when it was in Edmonton, where Lynch was only going to run. They were never going to let him throw the football. They're not two completely different quarterbacks. So yeah, I think you just prepare for Riley. And if you get Rourke, you just roll with the punches like Saskatchewan did in week 1.
I think BC so far through the first 2 weeks of the season is definitely the surprise. We'll talk about the Alouettes later because I think they surprised as well. But BC's 2 games in and they've played relatively well when, things looked like they were stacked against them, right? You just said it yourself. Everybody at the CFL, CFL.ca picked against the Lions because they felt the Lions were going to fall short in Calgary. And BC, outside of a bad first half where maybe it was opening day jitters, they've looked really good. In the second half against the Riders, they almost came all the way back and pulled the upset. But as for the Calgary Stampeders, I wrote in my article on the Betting Perspective when I was talking about this game, I said, few things in the CFL are certain, but it seemed over the last 5 years, one thing that's been certain, Dave Dickinson can find the answers when his offense struggles. Wasn't the case in game 2 of the season. I said on last week's show, I thought Cody Fajardo was the MOP. Bo Levi Mitchell is always a threat to have an unbelievable season and end up winning the most coveted award in the Canadian Football League. But I said he wasn't going to be able to put up the production. I had no idea he would come out and throw 4 interceptions in week 2.
Never done it before. Never in his entire career in the CFL. He's never done that.
Calgary in week 1 against Ottawa looked bad. They looked really bad. Kadeem Carey, I thought in the second half, was doing everything in his power to hand the game to the Red Blacks. A fumble, a personal foul down the stretch of that game. And it's like, okay, we have to be able to fix this. Well, game 2, the turnovers didn't stop. It came from the quarterback this time. For Calgary, maybe this is where the page turns and you have to reinvent yourself. And there's nothing to say that the Ticats aren't in the same boat. when you look at those two teams, they've been very good over the last little while, but they kind of just stayed the course. They never, were really pushing in free agency to get a star to bring into the team and really kickstart things again. Calgary didn't really do it. Hamilton didn't really do it. Now for Calgary, do you have the guys in house that can kickstart that Stampeders way of football again? I don't know. But coming out the first 2 weeks at home and you fall in both games, it's a bad look on the team right now.
Yeah, I think in terms of getting the big star, like Hamilton's brought in Jaguar Davis and Larry Dean, and then they obviously
no, I'm saying after the lockout.
Yeah, or, yeah, like going into
2021.
Yeah, like 2021, like trying to invest further. I think the retirements hurt Hamilton, obviously, and we'll get to them. But when I look at Calgary specifically right now, just to wrap a thought on them, is that the free agency stuff has really hurt them. Like when you're playing against Toronto in Week 1. And you're watching Eric Rogers catch a 2-point and Juwan Briscason, which prayers up for him. I hope that his knee is not that bad because that looked really scary in this game this past week. But when you see those guys making catches, making plays, getting into the end zone, and then you realize that, yeah, Markeith Ambles is a nice player. Josh Huff is a nice player, but they're not of the caliber of the Shaq Evans of the league, and even Rogers when he's down in that score zone. I mean, he's so long. Like you put it up for him, and his catch radius is. I love the 2-point conversion that McLeod Bethel Thompson threw him in Week 1 because he just threw it as hard as he could, 4 feet above the defensive back's head. And it's like, well, Rogers is just going to be like Kevin Durant because Kevin Durant, the secret with him in basketball is he can always get a shot off because he's 7 feet tall, and so he can. It doesn't matter where he is on the court, outside the 3-point line, at the elbow, in by the rim. No matter what, Kevin Durant is so long and so tall that he will just shoot over the top of you. Well, that's what Eric Rogers is as a ball catcher. Like you can just throw it up to him. So what I'm saying is when you lose that, all of a sudden you start seeing Bo Levi Mitchell taking shots down the middle of the field to Richard Sindani. And it's like Sindani's a nice player. He's a nice Canadian, but he's not Eric Rogers. Or, Kamar Jordan.
Yeah.
When Kamar Jordan was a 2 or a 3 in that offense, he was unbelievable. But he's really trying to carry the load right now, and they're really trying to run their entire offense through him because it's either Ambles, Jordan, or Huff essentially at this point, with a couple Canadians sprinkled in there. Herji Mayala, I think, needs more targets, but at the same time, he was only 4 catches on 7 targets this week for 50 yards, which is not bad. But I mean, they just feel like they're $1 short when you're walking up to the till and the cashier says $17.50, and you empty out all your change and you got 16.25 and you're like, shit, I don't have enough. That's what it feels like right now when they're walking up to the cash. And I don't know how they change that because what Calgary does so well is draft, develop, and sign free agents that turn into people that you go, wow, I can't. And they do have Jameer Thurman, and they do across the defensive line. Like Mike Rose, I think, is becoming a really nice player. I think Deshaun Amos is a really nice defensive back, but the players that I just listed are all on defense. And on offense, yes, they got Sean McEwen in free agency. That's great. But your center's not going to impact the outcome of the game if nothing around him is working.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Did you have a problem with, not even a problem, did you think that Dave Dickinson was trying to get at something with his comments after Week 1 when he talked about Bo Levi Mitchell's confidence in his receivers when they had to really dig down the depth chart because some guys were, got banged up in the game, couldn't take snaps, and Bo Levi Mitchell, he just looked off, and he still looks off. So I don't know if Week 1 kind of carried over to Week 2, but if there's a confidence problem in Bo Levi Mitchell with his receivers, then Calgary has a bigger problem on their hands.
Yeah, and I think what this comes down to, and I think we've seen it in a couple of other places. Again, Hamilton is another one that I would say when Jeremiah Masoli is trying to throw the ball to Poppy White, which it's really hard for me to think that's not just Pat White playing receiver, but which goes to show my age because there's a lot of people probably listening to this going, Pat, what the hell?
Yeah,
Pat White. But when he's trying to throw to Poppy White or he's trying to throw to Tim White, or he's trying to throw to Marcus Tucker, or he's trying to throw to Jalen Marshall. It's like those guys have been around, but he doesn't have the chemistry with them that he does with Banks or Addison or even Ackland at this point. And you can see it when a quarterback is just not locked in on the way that a guy's body is going to come out of a break. And Bo looks like that with everybody, I would say, honestly, right now, other than Kamar Jordan. And that might be the primary concern in that Calgary offense is that Bo just doesn't seem to know where people are going to come out or where they're going to go. And I know this, Kyle, and this is, one of those things that low-key I took basically pictures of every page of the Calgary Stampeders playbook when I was there in 2013, and I still have the entire playbook in my basement. I've never shown anybody it, but once in a while, just to be nostalgic, I'll just flip through it and look. The amount of option routes that they have in that offense with Dave Dickinson, like it's for me, I'm so glad that I wasn't given more reps in that training camp because I would have made an ass of myself because I had absolutely no idea what people were reading and where they were supposed to break off. Now I've gotten older, I see more football, I see it from a different vantage point, and so I could probably have a better understanding. But at that point when I'm like 20, I don't know, 21, 22 years old, and I'm going into a CFL training camp and I'm flipping through the 300-page playbook, and every single page there's a route that has dotted line to the post, dotted line to the skinny, dotted line to the corner, dotted line to the curl, and it's like, okay, you have to know what somebody's body language is showing you when they're going to chop, chop, chop and come out of it and come back to you. And if you don't, in that offense, with that amount of option routes and those guys that are stepping up, it's going to create inefficiency and it's going to create interceptions. And that's how you get 9 points against a BC Lions defense that, yeah, their defensive backfield looks really good right now. But I mean, 9 points in the CFL is not acceptable when Bo Levi Mitchell is your starting quarterback. So, yeah, I think it's on the relationships. It is.
I will say this about not just this game, but across the CFL this year, we've seen yards from quarterbacks and from offenses, but not necessarily points. Teams are having a hard time finishing drives across the league, and it's weird to me. Like the BC Lions only put up 15 points. Mike Riley throws for 342 yards. Like that's crazy. You think the BC Lions would have 30 points if Michael Riley is throwing that many yards? And then I just wanted to say too, congratulations to you for Lucky Whitehead. You talked about him on last week's show, potentially being a difference maker, over 100 yards receiving. And then Brian Burnham, like those two guys might become the new 1-2 punch in the CFL in terms of just killing teams. Brian Burnham has done it many times before with Emmanuel Arsenault back in the day, the BC Lions, when Arsenault was still, one of the premier receivers in the CFL. So I'm looking at Lucky Whitehead and I'm thinking, okay, he just bursted onto the scene and he made his mark. But I would just like to see more points from the BC Lions, from every team in the CFL. I just feel like scoring's down for some strange reason. I don't think the offenses have clicked in yet. Maybe for the defenses, and it comes down to mentality. What drives you, right? Like what drives a quarterback to, give it his all and play his best versus a guy who's a middle linebacker. Well, a guy who's a middle linebacker, all he needs to do is hit somebody the first time and he's into the game. And it's like, okay, I'm running sideline to sideline now, making plays, where for a quarterback, it's about finding rhythm. And it's not really trying harder to find rhythm. It just naturally comes about. And sometimes you need time. And maybe the defenses are way ahead of the pace of the offense. So we'll see how that, evolves over the season.
Yeah. The thing with Lucky Whitehead, by the way, and the reason that I kind of believed that he might be what he is right now for BC through 2 weeks, and this is not to toot my own horn, it's just to explain kind of the thinking behind it, was that I watch all the games very closely, obviously, and I liked the way that he looked in Winnipeg. And he, to me, in Winnipeg, felt like Brandon Banks when Kent Austin was coaching the Ticats, where it was like, this guy is fast, he has hands,
but he's not really part of the offense.
He makes people miss, but you're using him as a gadget guy in a reverse. And that's because in Winnipeg, Paul Appelese was like, I have Andrew Harris, I have Darvin Adams, I've got Wolotarski, I've got Lawler coming into his own. Like, I don't need Lucky Whitehead. He's not going to get many touches. Let's save him for special teams and let's use him sporadically in the offense. But then he signs in free agency in BC. And my thinking immediately was, this feels like someone who another team noticed, no, that guy's way more than just a returner. And then they signed him in free agency. And again, I didn't even talk to anybody in BC about this, but I saw the signing. I'm like, they probably saw what I saw. So I wondered.
Yeah.
And then in training camp, all these articles were being written out in BC by Matt Baker from their team website saying, Lucky Whitehead scored another touchdown in the scrimmage today. And Lucky Whitehead made this great move. And Lucky Whitehead this and that. And I started going, okay, they're using him, but I don't know where he's going to get on the field. I thought he would be the 6th receiver and he'd be a sub package guy. Depth chart comes out week 1. He's the boundary wide receiver.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. And then he scores the long 75-yard touchdown in week 1 to save Nathan Rourke. His stat line for sure. And then you see him go into this game and he's still balling out and doing his thing. So to me, he is essentially like Rick Campbell is to Lucky Whitehead what June Jones at this point was to Brandon Banks' career, where he has given him fresh life.
Let me give you another name, because I was looking at the production of Lucky Whitehead. And Brandon Banks, and the comparison is there because the trajectory of their career maybe are very similar. And maybe the trajectory of this player's career isn't the same as Lucky Whitehead's, but what he brings to the table is kind of the same. I think this guy is a little bit of a better receiver, but
Yeah.
Deontay Spencer in Ottawa was huge for Rick Campbell, and obviously Rick Campbell's not calling offensive plays,
Yeah.
but still a guy that you can lean on to be one of the the guys that carry your offense, and maybe Deontay Spencer, or sorry, Lucky Whitehead has become the Deontay Spencer of Rick Campbell in BC. So we'll see how that shakes itself out throughout the year.
The last thing on Calgary here, Bo Levi, I just looked it up because we were talking about it. 55.3% completion rate. That's not going to win you any games,
No.
unless you're Ottawa for some reason, and you can get like 2 pick sixes or something against Edmonton. But